Friends, we're in week 2 of our Found series, in which we're looking at the story of Moses and finding what his life has to teach us for the season that we find ourselves in. We're wrapping up this year of the story in which we've looked at the way that story influences our lives. And so I wanted to look at one of the patriarchs, one of the Old Testament characters that's central to the story of our faith, and pull some scenes out of that. And there was nobody that felt better to look at than Moses for me. So we read from Exodus 3 last week, and I want to go actually back to Exodus 2, and I'm going to start in verse 11 and probably read through 22 to hear a little bit more of his story and how it is that he is formed a bit into the leader that he becomes. So hear these words. One day after Moses had grown up, he went out to his people and saw their forced labor. He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his kinfolk. He looked this way and that, and seeing no one, he killed the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. When he went out the next day, he saw the 2 Hebrews fighting, and he said to the one who was in the wrong, "Why do you strike your fellow Hebrew?" That one answered, "Who made you ruler and judge over us? Do you mean to kill me as you killed the Egyptian?" Then Moses became afraid and thought, "Surely this thing is known." When Pharaoh heard of it, he sought to kill Moses. But Moses fled from Pharaoh. He settled in the land of Midian and sat down at a well. The priests of Midian had 7 daughters. They came to draw water and filled the troughs to water their father's flock. But some shepherds came and drove the women away. Moses got up and came to their defense and watered their flock. When they returned to their father Reuel, he said, "How have you come back so soon today?" They said, "An Egyptian helped us against the shepherds. He even drew water for us and watered the flock." He said to his daughters, "Where is he? Where did you leave the man? Invite him to break bread." Moses agreed to stay with the man, and he gave Moses his daughter Zipporah in marriage. She bore a son, and he named him Gershom, for he said, "I have been an alien residing in a foreign land." May God add blessing to our reading and understanding of these words. So the background of Moses' life we talked about last week. He has this bicultural reality in which he was born a Hebrew but grows up in the palace of the Egyptians. He benefits from the oppression of his own people. And you see some of the dynamics of what happens in the midst of that, in that confusion. You get the idea that Moses never really felt at home in any one place. He never fully belonged to himself or to any group of people, and you can imagine that it was a chaotic and a difficult and a trauma-filled childhood in many sorts of ways. And so it would suggest from the text that he develops an issue with rage. We could say it differently, that he develops coping mechanisms. Each and every one of us does that from a very young age. We address deficiencies or problems or gaps in our environment by developing certain habits and certain masks and certain ways of being in order to get along. And so we wear masks to protect us from what is off a bit in our environment. So it may be that you grew up in a very volatile household, and you learned how to walk on eggshells and minimize your own needs so that you didn't disrupt the system and create more chaos. If you grew up in a place where you never felt like you were living up to the expectations of your family, you may feel that find that you're constantly on a treadmill, always trying to perform and project even decades later and sort of meeting that gap. We all do this in various ways. It's why there's good work to be done in therapy, but it's also a work of faith. For Moses, it would seem that something in his continual living between these two worlds, floating in privilege, but also standing on the backs of his kinfolk, that all of that has led him to be confused and angry and tempted to misuse his power over others. Ruth Haley Barton talks about this in a book that she wrote, In the Confused Nature of His Life. She gives the example of what happens when his future wife talks about him to his future father-in-law. As she reads Exodus 2, Moses is introduced to his future father-in-law, the priest of Midian, as an Egyptian, and he doesn't even bother to correct his future wife. She says it seems that because he's so accustomed to being unclear about his identity and blending in with the situation around him, that he had learned to just keep quiet and let others think and believe whatever they wanted to believe. That's a part of Moses' coping mechanism. That's a part of the mask that he puts on. Father Richard Rohr talks about these things that we develop, these coping mechanisms, as examples of the false self. He describes it as social and mental constructs that get us started on life's journey. And he says that at the beginning, they're very necessary. We need them. We all develop them in adolescence and in childhood and even in young adulthood. We all do them. We'll do them throughout our lives. We'll develop them. And they're good at the beginning. But while they get us started, the false self becomes problematic when you stop there and you spend the rest of your life trying to protect that and promote it. If you do not let go of your false self at the right time and in the right way, you will remain stuck and trapped and addicted. I wonder if you've been on that journey in your life. I mean, I think all of us have. I wonder what it's looked like in your life. If you've realized that you've developed hideouts or habits that served you in an earlier season, but maybe they're not allowing you to thrive in this particular season. They've prevented you from flourishing where you are right now. If you've realized that there was something that you needed to release and let go of so that you could move into a different and a better future, move towards that life that is truly life. Now, my guess is that it probably didn't take a murderous act of rage for you to come to yourself. That's what it was for Moses. But it's very likely that there was some sort of traumatic event, maybe a relationship ending, maybe when something that you tried to keep hidden suddenly came out, or misdeed suddenly came to light and to be known. Or maybe it was when the bottom just dropped out and you finally realized something's got to change. It happens for a lot of us in those moments when we see something, see ourselves do something that we said we never would do, that we do that work of coming to ourselves. I think a big part of our call to faith is to work through these false selves and to move towards our true selves. Moses does this in the wilderness in Midian. That will be the place that God finds him, as we talked about last week. But even before that, Moses finds himself. We see it for him come to fruition at the birth of his son. Can I say that's another place where this tends to happen a lot is even good life events like the birth of a child. I've heard so many people say that all of a sudden, like that changed everything for them. Maybe for you it was a niece or a nephew or a child that you adopted or seeing a child that you've loved grow up. That there's often times that become defining for us, where we have more clarity and more definition of ourselves in the world, all that begin to take space. Pastor Nanette talks about these as thin spaces in which we realize perhaps better who it is that we want to be and who it is that God is calling us to be. For Moses, when he's removed himself from the constancy of the reminder that he doesn't fully fit in, the challenges of his life, of his identity crisis, it's when he goes into the wilderness that he's able to find himself. And at the conclusion of that, you really get the clarity about where that process leads when he names a truth about himself. For I have been an alien residing in a foreign land. We often read past that very quickly, but you cannot overstate how important and how powerful that is. For Moses, this is not simply a statement of fact, like I'm in Midian, I'm in a different place, or I was in Egypt and I didn't belong there. No, this is about his core and fundamental identity. It's about who he is. It's about the struggle in his life. It's not only about what presents itself, but it's the thing that's behind the scene thing. It's not just the anger, but it's the thing that causes the anger. It's not just the confusion, it's the thing that causes the confusion, that he has never truly belonged in any one place. He's saying the quiet part out loud, and this has emerged after a long time of giving his soul space in the wilderness to sort of speak into the silence. The naming of these destructive patterns that he lived in the world, it's not just about that, but it's about what's the deep-rooted source. This is Moses coming to himself. This is Moses finding himself. I've never really belonged to anyone or to myself, but I'm through with that, he says. Barton says that the first leg of Moses' leadership journey isn't to lead anyone else, but in fact it is to allow himself to be led to freedom from his bondage. You know, going back to what we talked about last week, when Moses encounters the burning bush, I wonder if before he had this revelation, this reckoning, if he would have walked right on by and been unaware. Friends, in moments like this, we often find a sort of liberation that would have seemed absurd to us in an earlier season of life. And in our freedom, we find the ability to live the sort of life that is truly life that God invites us into and imagines for us. And this will be a journey for each one of us in our own ways. Many of you know that my personal life verse and a verse that has shaped my ministry is John 10:10. Jesus is speaking and he says, the thief comes only to steal, kill, and destroy, but I have come that you may have life and life in abundance, or life that is truly life. In other words, I think what he's saying is that we develop these false selves, to put it in language of Richard Rohr, and I've come that you may discover and uncover your true self. We develop these patterns that maybe serve us for a season. I've come so that you can pattern your life after me and be connected to God, to each other, to ourselves, and to the world as God has intended from the very beginning. So this week, with this message in this second week of Found, my hope is to do two things. First of all, I want you to look back. I want to encourage you to look back and consider the ways that you have come to yourself in your own journey of faith. I hope that in our ministry together, whether we've been together for a few months or a few years, that Common Grace has aided in that process of realizing things about yourself, of letting go of patterns that you needed to release, of taking on habits that you needed to embrace. I hope that you've been aided in that process and helped to move closer to that life that is truly life. But it didn't just start there. Let's talk about Common Grace for a minute, though. One of the things that I've been most proud of and most excited and most honored to get to witness as a pastor is the way that I've seen people sort of move into new roles and new relationships with the church and with each other, and move into new spaces that they maybe never thought that they could be. I've talked about it in this way. I've said it was an unexpected blessing to see the ways that people have gotten off the sideline and into the game of what God is doing in the world. And for some of you, that simply means being a part of a church community at all. Like you didn't think you'd ever be here. You didn't think you'd ever have a church home. You thought you were done with that. You'd had bad representations of the church in the past, and you were ready just to let that go. I've seen people move from having no interest in a faith community at all to being involved in Common Grace and allowing themselves to have their understanding of God and of faith and of Christianity recast and of community. And I've loved that and loved to see how people sort of got in the game in that kind of way. It's been such a blessing. But for others, it was from moving to being just involved with a faith community like Sunday morning worship to being involved with a small group. And you said, I'm not going to do that. I don't have time for that. And all of a sudden it's become something that is central to who you are. And you can't imagine life without your Sunday school group, small group, your Wednesday night check-in, whatever the case is. It's been amazing to see people being vulnerable and willing to share, whereas they would have said they would never share in a group like that before, especially on matters that can be so uncomfortable for us as those of faith. It's been amazing to see this develop over time. For some of you, that's meant going from participating in a small group to leading a small group. And you would have said, I have nothing to share, nothing to lead. I can't take that responsibility, and yet you've done it. And you've been blessed and you've blessed others. To see people move deeper and move into places that they thought they'd never be, to get involved in the game, to embrace the gifts and the skills and the talents that you specifically have, and to use them in service to God's work in the community. Some of you have participated in or taken ownership over small parts of our life together, whether that's organizing volunteers or setup or managing the trailer, making sure that it gets there every week so that we can have our church in the Ball Conference Center. Some of you, it's been about taking on leadership roles and events, or just taking on the leadership of making sure that everybody who walks in the door knows that they are welcome and safe and can be included in this place, or doing follow-up. It's been amazing to watch people take ownership over small areas, to have some sort of leadership in our life together. And it's been beautiful. Friends, all of it has been beautiful. And I'm so grateful to God that I've been able to be a part of it. we do that coming into ourselves in community, we do that elsewhere as well. What's that look like for you? In what ways have you let go of lies that said that you couldn't be a part of a faith community, that you couldn't be a part of a small group, that you couldn't be a leader in order to step into that? What's that look like in your life? Maybe not in the church context, maybe elsewhere. Where has that happened recently or sometime in the past? Maybe you want to think about where that needs to happen in the future. And if you're not sure about when that has happened or where that has happened in your life, here's an invitation for you. Why don't you call a deeply trusted friend that you've known for a long time and say, hey, let's go for a walk. Friends, the weather is beautiful. And I think these conversations sometimes happen better on a walk, but maybe ask them, what is it that you've seen me let go of? How is it that you've seen me grow? What is it that you think I need to let go of in this season? Good friends can hold a beautiful and strong and powerful and challenging mirror to us that allow us to release the false selves that we develop in our lives. So my first hope is for you to look back at the ways that that's happened in your life. But my second hope for our time together is to remind you of who you are and the journey that you're on, and to remind you that this is a lifelong journey for every person of faith. This isn't something that started at Common Grace or today for most of us. We begin doing this in our adolescence, and it's clunky and oftentimes misguided in that, but we begin shedding things and defining who we are and taking on things, and then it becomes a lifelong process. Sometimes we stall out in that after we get through young adulthood or adolescence, and we just think that we're the same person for the rest of our lives, and we need to reconsider and reevaluate. That's a part of what we do as a people of faith. We reevaluate it in the light of the scriptures, in the context of community, covered in prayer, asking who it is that God might be calling us to be, how it is that God might be calling us to live into the future. So my second hope for this morning is to spur you on in that good work. Moses will become a leader of people, but he cannot do that until he comes to himself. He cannot do that until he is enough out of his head that he can be aware of the burning bushes that are happening around him. I believe that each one of us is called to serve and to love and to live God's light into the world. And it may not be a full-time church job, but if we are so entrenched in hiding, or as Richard Rohr said earlier, in promoting our masks, our false selves, then we're never truly open to how it is that God might be calling us to lead other people, to shine light and reflect love into the world. I want to spur you on in that work and encourage you to keep doing it and to take seriously that call of our faith. And I want to encourage you to do that together as a community called Common Grace, because we need community to do that. And if you find yourself on a mountaintop, or if you find yourself in the Midians of life, each of those is a different invitation to consider what it is that serves you and what it is that needs to be let go. How it is that you can listen to and nurture your soul, your true self, and let go of that which no longer serves you. This matters as much as ever right now, because I see who you are and I know what you can be. One of the gifts of this pastoral role that I've been able to be a part of over these last several years is that I have got to see the ways that God moves in your life, the joys and the sorrows, the work that we've done together to represent the good news of God to the community. I've seen it as you've embraced your capacity and your agency and your power. As a pastor in that pastoral role, you get to see how God is on the move in individual lives and in individual people, but also how each one of us possesses a gift of the Spirit. And together, when we put all of our light in the same room, how beautiful and amazing it can be. I've seen all of this. And all of this matters, especially today, because you're going to continue being God's people. That doesn't end. A community with one another for those outside of this building in the months and the years to come. And it will change and things will look different. And you'll have time getting to know Pastor Mitch and being a part of his ministry and hearing how God is speaking through him. But in all of it, you will continue to be the people that God has called you to be. And you'll have opportunities to lead and to share and to grow and to laugh and to love and to dream and to vision, and then to go out and make that vision a reality together. You'll have opportunities to lead that I probably have stifled. But like Moses, in order to do that, we have to let go of who we are not so that we can be who God is calling us to be. You'll be better able to do that work individually and collectively that God is calling Common Grace to be a part of when we've done this hard and challenging work of looking ourselves in the mirror, of honing in on our true identity and letting go of that which no longer serves us. When we've done that work of finding freedom, we can lead others into liberation as well. Friends, that's why this work is so important. Because we have an opportunity to continue to be the people that God has called us to be. You have an opportunity to continue to be the people that God has called you to be. There is a good and a beautiful future. And we're invited to find ourselves so that we can move forward in faith and confidence and trust into the future that only God knows. So spend some time this week considering what that looks like in your life and how it is that you might be freed for leadership in this church community, in your school, in your neighborhood, in your workplace, in your family, so that others might experience God's grace and liberation and light. Friends, we'll have a few moments for reflection here in just a second, but I want to send you from this place to do that work with God's blessing, to trust that God goes before you. So move in confidence as God invites us to find who we really are. Go in grace and go in peace. Amen.